Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your latest financial news from across New Zealand and around the world. In this edition, Italians celebrate in the streets as their controversial prime minister calls it quits. But who's the new guy, the new savior they call Super Mario? And U.S. President Barack Obama tells the APEC meeting in Honolulu he needs the deal on the Trans-Pacific Partnership happening within the year. Is this good news or bad news for New Zealand? And forget the dairy farms and infant formula plants. Are the Chinese now after our vineyards? Joining me with the latest information on the markets is ASB rural economist James Shortall. And James, the markets seem to have settled down a little bit with what appears to be some changes in Europe.
Yeah, well, I guess they're taking on the fact that they made some decisions and we've got some new leaders into the mix. So that should be good news, but the markets just continue to flip-flop all over the show. 3% up on Friday, Monday they're down again, and we're going to see this for a while to come.
Now, we have a new leader in Greece. We also have a new leader in Italy, and we'll talk more about that in part two. But bottom line, they've still got a heck of a long way to go.
Well, yeah, definitely. And in Italy over the weekend, they did announce that new austerity measures, they put those through. But really it comes back to whether or not we can actually get a framework around the whole situation, the solution. And that hasn't been passed yet. There's still some doubts as to whether that will actually happen. So this whole thing could still crumble. There's still a lot of moving parts and some issues to work through. And
meantime, here at home, thanks to the Reserve Bank, we all have to now think a little bit more about our own banking costs. The Financial Stability Report was coming out just before we met the last time. What's it mean for us?
Well, yeah, so the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, they send out a Financial Stability Report twice a year. So this last report came out last Thursday, and effectively what it did say was that they were a bit worried about what's happening in Europe, and we're actually going to start to feel the effects here at home with what is happening in Europe, particularly for funding costs. So when credit markets are really tight, which they are right now, and as they were back in 2008, then that's likely to mean some higher funding costs, and it may just mean, even though we may have a lower official cash rate right through part of next year, it's going to mean that interest rates may start to have to rise.
So what should farmers be thinking about? Fixed, floating? What's your advice?
Well, I guess they've got to take a little bit of a mix because there's still going to be lower wholesale interest rates for a while to come yet, and that's in my opinion. But there is some risks around at the moment with funding costs, so they could hedge their bets and look at a bit of both.
Okay, coming up within a very few hours, a global dairy trade auction. What are you picking?
Well, with so much going on around the world, you'd have to say that there's going to be some potential weakness out there because there's weakness for all markets at the moment, including agricultural commodities. So, if you had to pick one way or the other, you'd have to say there's going to be a bit of weakness. But dairy prices in general have been holding up, and if we have seen any declines, they've only been very, very minimal.
The New Zealand dollar, of course, remains under pressure. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, the Kiwi dollar, I mean, what we have been seeing over the past few weeks and over the past few months, really, with all these issues that's happening in Europe and in the US, and people have been diving back into the US dollar. So
yeah, great news for them, not so much for us.
That's right. So they've been getting, they don't want to take any risks. They've been getting back to the US, getting back into US treasuries, and that's really the reason why we're seeing the Kiwi dollar back. So the New Zealand dollar's been back trading under 78 cents against the US early in the morning and that sort of thing. So we do still think that once we work through this, we will rise, but it's going to take time for us to work through this, and we could still be relatively weak.
Apart from dairy, James, what are you picking for the local agricultural commodities? How is beef doing, for example?
Well, when you look at red meat, lamb and beef, they are going into the season very, very strongly. We've got local schedule prices that are high, and beef prices in terms of schedules have also risen a lot over the past, say, 6 weeks. I'm still picking that we will see a little bit of weakness through the season, and these are seasonal drivers that we typically do see. But I think in general we're going to see a good year for most farmers, and the fact that the New Zealand dollar has dropped a little bit is going to offer a nice little buffer for any slippage in demand we might see in some of our established markets.
Supply, of course, is still a problem for us. How is that likely to impact the economy, do you think?
Well, we've got dairy supply is rising. We've got supply lifting in the US and some of our other markets, even though they're going into the slower part of their season right now. But we have had a very, very good start to our spring, and just looking around the country a little bit over the past few weeks, we've seen plenty of rain, we're starting to get a bit of sunshine, grass is growing pretty well, and that is meaning we're probably going to see a lift in numbers, both in terms of production in dairy, but also in lamb numbers. So a lift in supply will have a bit of an effect on the market, but I'm not picking that's going to have too much of an effect.
Thanks, James. Coming up after the break, alarm bells are ringing for kiwi apple growers as a German company makes a bid to take over Turners and Growers. And the International Monetary Fund's top banker warns Italy's economic crisis is the world's problem, and that includes little old New Zealand. What will it really mean for our economy and our banks? Meantime, New Zealand landowners have only this month to apply for pre-1994 land compensation credits under the ETS. So answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. How many million credits have yet to be applied for, and what are they worth? The answers when we come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you how many million pre-1994 land compensation credits under the ETS have yet to be applied for, and what are they worth? 19.5 million credits are still up for grabs until the end of this month, worth $280 million. So get your skates on and cash in quick. Joining us now to talk about Mario Monti, the man who's been asked to form a new Italian government to tackle the debt crisis after Mr. Berlusconi finally resigned, is Spicer's senior financial advisor, Jeff Matthews. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Genevieve.
And who the heck is Mr. Monti?
He was one of the European commissioners. He was looking after monopolies. So, I mean, he's one of the guys that went after Microsoft a few years ago for anti-competitive trading. They ended up paying almost $500 million in fines. He's gone after some of the banks. He's gone after the Germans a few years ago when they were giving subsidies. So, you know, he's been pretty hard-nosed. And from memory, he's the president of Italy's best known, which I can't remember the name of, business school. So, I mean, he comes from a business background, and he's, you know, he may be a softie from the media's point of view, but he's been pretty hard-nosed behind the scenes, and he's going to have to be hard-nosed.
And I believe it's the Turin Universities where he was an economics professor.
Thank you.
So yeah, so he knows his stuff. He's a tough negotiator. They don't call him Super Mario for nothing, but he's still got a heck of a challenge ahead of him.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the media's talking about, you know, Italy's got the third biggest, you know, amount of debt, $1.9 trillion US worth of debt, but it also has $1.8 trillion worth of assets on the other side. So the Italian government owns, you know, there are barracks, there are military bases, there's a lot of land that the state owns. It's 100% of the postal service, it's got telecommunications, it's got energy companies. So there are a bunch of assets that they could, you know, reduce and you know, be a much more comfortable position. They're still, you know, the seventh largest economy in the world, and, you know, great export industries. It's just that they've stagnated over the last, you know, certainly the last 10 years.
But meantime, Mr. Monti has got to get it past a cabinet. He's got to pick his own cabinet, and he's also got to survive a confidence vote, James. What do you think the markets are thinking around the world as they sit and watch now what Mr. Monti might be up to?
Well, they're crapping themselves, I'd say. That's what we've been seeing with Greece and with Italy. They just don't know what to think, what's going to come out of this. But it's interesting to see the people that are coming to the front. People that markets will like. They are, you know, they're coming from the European Commission, from the European Central Bank. They're all business minded, they're financial minded. So it's sort of, you know, they've been put into these places so that markets will have a bit of confidence that they're going to do the right thing and they're going to make it happen.
So here's a question: is political democracy over in Europe now? Is you know, are the EU bankers moving in and calling the shots, saying to politicians, "You're out, we're coming in to make things happen"?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, any of those kind of reforms, even if you're a technocrat like Monti, is you have to take the populace with you. If you know, you have to explain to people the reasons why you're doing it, and okay, they might not like it, but you have to take them with you. Otherwise, you know, you're a goner at the next election. And, you know, I mean, we vote for some idiots for politicians. You know, look at, you know, local body. I mean, we complain about our politician, but who votes them? We do. I mean, same in Italy. For years, they voted for people who gave them whatever they wanted. Now the bills come in.
And Super Mario gave a rousing speech, apparently, telling the populace, don't worry, Italy is not a financial disaster. Would you agree, James?
I don't think I would agree with that. I mean, they've got some massive hurdles to get through, and some of those hurdles are going to be relying on support from the European Union, the policymakers, that sort of thing, that still aren't in place and are still on a little bit of shaky ground just yet. So there's still a lot of things to work through, and a lot of issues that haven't been resolved. And I think you brought up an important point there, around what this is all going to mean. I mean, we're seeing a big change, change in the wheel and the dynamics out of Europe that we could potentially see happen over the next 10 or over the next few decades, in terms of the policies and in terms of the mindset of people, in terms of the leadership, all those sorts of things. Just because they're in a bit of a sticky situation right now, and they've got to get themselves out.
Yeah, and it was only on Wednesday that Italian government bonds hit, I think it was over 7%. 7.5%. 7.5%. What does that say to you?
Oh, well, the markets were panicking. I mean, normally they're down below 6, so there was a huge gap between those and German 10-year bonds, and what the market's saying is, we don't like what's going on. And so Berlusconi going was part of that, and getting somebody in there who the markets felt were a safe pair of hands. But I say, you've got a 3 to 5 year program. You've got to deregulate parts of the labour market. You need to, free up parts of the economy. Here's
a scary statistic. In the past 15 years, economic growth in Italy has averaged 0.75%.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly. And I mean, when you talk about the issues that markets are facing, then the 7%. A lot of people say, once you get over the 7%, then it starts to get unsustainable over the long term. That you just can't repay those debts. The funding costs are too high, and even over the past 24 hours, the Italians have issued more bonds out into the market, and those the yields on those bonds have been extremely high, about 1% higher than the last auction that they put out. So the markets are still fretting. They're still worried. And it's going to take some time for them to settle down.
Yeah. But the European Central Bank needs to come in, with a big size cannon and says we're going to buy Spanish bonds, we're going to buy Italian bonds. I don't care what you think. We're just going to keep buying them. The markets, that's what happened 3 years ago with the US. They came in with the TARP money, and the markets settled down again, and they were able to repay most of that money within 18 months.
Okay, let's talk briefly about the US. What's the latest there, Jeff? You think it's still not as bad as the world media and the market seem to think. And Warren Buffett is one example.
I think I saw the numbers the other day. I think 422 out of the top 500 companies have reported their September profits. 70% have exceeded their profits, but on average 15%, 10% met their target, and only 20% underperformed. So at the company level, companies are still out there producing. It doesn't matter if you're Chrysler or Ford or General Motors. People are making products, people are buying and selling them. So the manufacturing numbers out of the States aren't that bad. But the market is fixated with, trying to resolve this issue in Europe, and it's a banking issue, and the banks need to be recapitalised. I mean, in the States, 3 years ago, the banks lent money on subprime mortgages and a whole lot of weird and wonderful things, and they had to be bailed out. What we've had in Europe is the banks have been basically buying debt from supposedly sovereign countries, and we realise that buying stuff in Estonia or Greece perhaps isn't a secure investment.
And in terms of consumer confidence, the U.S. is apparently at a 5-month high, so the ordinary folk are feeling pretty good. And we have this super committee now meeting, bipartisan, at the White House. Are they going to be able to deal to the horrible, horrible debt that they have?
Well, probably one of the best things that's happened to the US lately is Europe, in my opinion, because Europe has taken all the fuss. They're taking all
they're taking the heat, baby.
They're taking some serious heat. I mean, we take ourselves back 2 months. When the debt ceiling was all the issue, the focus was on the US. Prior to that, it was all about Europe too. So. I think they're probably thanking some of these Berlusconi and some of their buddies across the water for helping them out a little bit. But I suppose the US is ticking along pretty well. They are seeing the US dollar has been pretty weak. They're trading out in a lot of cases, and we are actually seeing that in some of our markets, particularly in beef, where they are exporting a lot more and they're making use of the fact that the US dollar is low.
And hello, President Obama has now figured out that China could be a very important market, and the rest of Asia. And I see that he's been at the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership talks, that New Zealand's been involved in for a long time now. He wants a slice of the action. He wants a deal done before he's up for re-election next year. My question, what took the Americans so long to figure out that this could be good for them?
Well, it's a very good question. I've got no idea. I mean, we know that that's where the markets are going, that's where they want to go, and they probably benefited in a lot of ways just recently out of some of that expansion too. I did also notice that he was complaining about, the low levels of the yuan. It's got to appreciate all these sorts of things. We've been hearing this story for quite a while, but I can't see that that's going to change anytime soon, because they going to continue to control it.
But realistically, James, do you think that the U.S. dairy farmers are going to, like President Obama, perhaps bartering away their trade subsidies, if you like?
Hell no. I mean, there's no way. They don't like, we Kiwis getting into their mix in terms of dairy and agricultural production.
And Pharmax, another industry that could be in trouble.
That's right, and I just don't. We've seen a lot of pressure coming on the global dairy industry around from the US farmers, and they do hold a lot of power in different political circles in the US to try and manipulate things to their advantage. So that's going to be a sticking point, and I think it's going to be interesting. If it does come through, it's going to be a huge benefit to us for sure.
The economists love talking about how things shift around the world. Let's look at the wine industry, and let's talk about China. I found this fascinating, Jeff. This is something near and dear to your heart, because I believe you like a tipple occasionally.
Occasionally.
And the Chinese are buying up vineyards, not only in Australia, but in France as well, and some interest here in New Zealand.
In the last kind of year, 18 months, they bought about 5 vineyards in the Bordeaux region. And in the last 3 months, they bought 6 vineyards in the Hunter Valley. So, I mean, they've been really the only buyer in the Hunter Valley recently, because, vineyards are trading at probably about 50% of where they were 3 years ago. And some of the properties have been on the market for 4 or 5 years. So in that sense, it's giving people an exit strategy. And I understand they've also been looking at Central Otago.
Correct.
Possibly trying to buy a vineyard. But they did win a major award in London in September for a Bordeaux wine in the kind of $10 to $15 a bottle. So, I mean, they're producing wine in China as well now. And that's kind of scaring the French. Is, okay, you come along, buy a few vineyards, not a problem. But once you start producing quality wines that compete with them, then
that's a different story.
A totally different story.
So maybe here we shouldn't just be worried about the Chinese perhaps coming in and buying up our dairy farms. We should be looking at the vineyards as well.
Yeah, okay.
What do you think?
No, but it's okay for the French to buy vineyards or the Germans to buy vineyards, but we don't like the Chinese to buy vineyards. I mean, that seems to be the kind of common theme at the moment.
Coming up after the break, Future Proof on the highways and byways of the economic world. Buckle up as our experts take us along for the ride and point out what they'll be watching for over the coming week. But first, a survey commissioned by North Island Farmer Group trying to buy the Crayford dairy farms showed that 82% of New Zealanders believe foreign ownership of farms and agricultural land was a bad thing. So answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. What percentage of Kiwis oppose these countries buying up our land? Find out after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, what percentage of Kiwis oppose these countries buying up our land? 86% of Kiwis don't want Chinese purchasing our farmland. 76% of Kiwis say no to the USA. 67% of us don't want Brits buying us up. And 54% of Kiwis say no deal to the Aussies either. And now it's time for Future Proof. What's coming up for our experts? And I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about ETS. It's a subject that you feel is really important for farmers. Tell me more.
Yeah, well, you talked about it earlier on. I just think it's critical that farmers understand that they've got till the end of the month really to take advantage of this, and they're going to get one chance only to actually get a little bit of money back for the fact that their pre-1990 forests are going to go into the ETS by default, basically. So I just think it's critical that if you've got some trees on your farm, either call MAF, go onto the website, check it out, and make sure you get some value out of it.
Why not? $280 million just sitting there, for the next 2 weeks, and then it's all over.
and it's going to be money lost because in future you're not going to be able to cut those trees down. If you're going to try and sell them, then there's going to be probably a lower value on that land. So it's a big issue that farmers have to get them behind it.
Okay, and also I wanted to get your take on this big German company now that has made a takeover bid on Turners and Growers. Is that going to hurt our apple industry, do you think, long term, as many of the pip fruit guys here say?
Well, potentially it could. I think it's a bit of a shame that we're seeing GPG sort of selling down a lot of their assets, trying to dissolve some of those assets, and it looks like we're going to see this one go offshore to a foreign company. So it would be great to see it retained here in New Zealand by New Zealand shareholders. Don't think that's going to be the case. I guess there's always a risk when that happens that the producers may have a bit of an adverse sort of event in the future, I guess, around their prices and that sort of thing. So could be an issue to watch out for.
Yeah, apparently the growers are worried about strains like jazz that were, if you like, produced here. Some of them are produced in the northern hemisphere now, but under strictly controlled conditions. They could lose out on this completely, couldn't they? I mean, this is something that has come from New Zealand growers.
Yeah, well, you start to see some of the products distributed into different parts of the world because growing them in different seasons for the global market, and you take the best from what we produce and potentially take them into different areas. So I guess that's always going to be the risk. I guess the one consolation is that the German company is a very big company, very big trader of product around the world, may give us access into some different markets and into some different areas that we haven't had access to before.
Yeah, and it would need, of course, the Overseas Investment Office approval as well. That could take a while. Look at the Crate for Farms. They still don't know what to do about it.
That's right. I mean, yeah, it's a good point. We could be waiting here. We could be talking about this one for a while to come. But there's been signal for a while that Turners and Growers is going to be sold down. So perhaps if it comes through, it's a strong company, then that decision might be made fairly quickly.
Jeff, do you agree with that? Do you have any worries about Turners and Growers maybe being taken over by the Germans?
As far as I know, I mean they're growing apples in France, but it's all under licensing. So I mean, they will get licensing rights. It's just a question of how you control that in the future. I mean, their Turners are growing stuff up in China as well. So it's got potential, but I mean, it hasn't been a very profitable business. As a GPG shareholder, I'd have to say that it's been an emotional connection rather than a logical one. When you look at the returns that it generates, that they're unattractive.
Okay. Now, what are you going to be watching over the next 7 days, Jeff? We're getting close to an election.
Well, it's interesting, for the private investor level, there's actually quite a bit of interest to buy some of the state-owned assets, especially the power companies. Not too many people interested in Air New Zealand shares, but power company shares look pretty attractive. I mean, depending on the pricing, but there's certainly investors are hiving money off to one side to look to buy some of those shares if and when they become available. Interestingly enough, that Sweden last week put on hold its asset sales because one is their debt position's not that bad, and two, the market's off about 18% this year. So why would you sell assets in a down market?
What were they thinking about selling off?
You mean here?
Yeah, no, in Sweden.
One of the banks that they took over back in the early 1990s, they've still retained a reasonable stake in that, and also a telephone company. So they just think that it's not much point selling it, and they're under no pressure. They've actually got budget surplus. So,
speaking of banks, I see that the bank CEOs of the four big Australasian banks, if you like, are making millions and millions and millions of dollars, not only in salaries but in incentives. Do they deserve that kind of money, James?
Tough question.
Especially since you work for a bank.
I wish I had those sorts of incentives myself, but I think there's been some huge pay packets. Let's be realistic here. There's been huge pay packets in the banking sector over the past couple of years. It's probably been a strong performer. So those incentives around those have probably overshadowed the fact some around the salary packages also. But there has been some big pay packets. Most
banks, I'm a classic example. You get stuck with one and you just kind of go along with it. It's not like they really have to work hard for it, do they?
Well, there's I will make this point. One of the interesting things that I picked up when the new Commonwealth Bank CEO was announced, Ian Narev, another Kiwi, taking over from Ralph Norris. Then in the press release, they actually made a sort of a one-page statement around what his pay packet is going to be. So they know that it's such a sticking point in the media, with the investors, with banking customers, and it was all around what the salary is, and the salary was, to me, was well short of what the package has been for previous CEOs and that sort of thing. So there's a lot around the incentives around the long-term share payments, that sort of thing, that overshadow the fact of where the actual salary is around some of these things.
So maybe they're going to get real and they're going to either donate to charity or tighten their belts as well, just the way they tell us all to do.
Or retire.
Yeah, whatever. Okay, thanks to my guests, ASB rural economist James Shortall and Jeff Matthews from Spicers. Be sure to check out our website. And remember to join us beginning Sunday for an exclusive series of political debates on the rural issues facing New Zealand.
They want to be here, but they need our votes to do it. So in a Country 99 TV exclusive, we turn up the heat on the politicians.
The world is crying out for traceability,
demanding that farmers utilise their water better.
2011 general elections, the rural issues.
Listen to our views.
Join us for the debate around agricultural issues
on Country 99 TV.
A series of debates proudly brought to you by Fonterra. Coming soon to Country 99 TV.
We'll be drilling down with 5 politicians over 5 nights. That's Sunday through Thursday, right here on Country 99 TV. Hosted by David Beatson. Keep the faith. See you next time.